All right, so this THCa thing, it's not intoxicating until you do something to it, like put a flame to it. And then it is, interestingly enough. This panel, THCa Hemp Insights, Risks and Best Practices. I don't know if you got to see Rod last night playing guitar, a hemp guitar, right? And he's one of the top attorneys in our space here, helping hemp businesses do what they need to do. And we are legal and the law of the land. And so Rod is going to moderate this panel again on this unique cannabinoid and what it means for our industry. Thank you, and take it away.
Thank you. Well, glad to be here. Tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, better known as THCa, is the hottest, quote-unquote, new cannabinoid on the market. It's no exaggeration to say that it may be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back regarding full cannabis legalization. We just heard that beverages may be that, so it's certainly up for grabs. But in particular, THCa flower, which is sold throughout the country via e-commerce, in hemp shops, in convenience stores, even in marijuana dispensaries, seems to be the final product category in a long line of hemp products. It sort of finally brings cannabis legalization to the forefront, or certainly kind of brings it full circle. Now, for anyone who knows anything about the cannabis plant, this is an odd development. As a precursor to Delta-9, THCa is actually the form of THC that the plant produces in abundance. And I think most people now understand that when a marijuana dispensary advertises a strain as having, say, 20% THC, that the vast majority of that, quote, THC is actually in the form of THCa, and that much of the cannabis flower currently sold in marijuana dispensaries actually would qualify, at least from the Delta-9 metric, as federally legal hemp. And of course, the opposite's somewhat true, given that THCa flower is flooding the market throughout the country. Some of the product that's being marketed as hemp would not qualify. It's sort of an overwhelming amount of product that's out there. And aside from the flower, THCa extracts are becoming more common. This is due to its health benefits, the fact that when heated, it is psychoactive, and also due to its novelty, which again is mostly with respect to the uninformed consumer versus the people that have been involved in growing cannabis for years. So today's panel consists of seasoned experts on the topic of THCa, including 3 lawyers. Going to speak about their various experiences with THCa, from regulatory advice to litigation to criminal law issues. And additionally, since probably no one wants to hear lawyers talk and drone on and on, we've got someone who's also who is involved not only in the United States but internationally with hemp, and he's going to give us some on-the-ground, practical viewpoints into what's happening with THCA and some of the issues that he's faced. So my name is Rod Kight, and I'm going to moderate today's discussion. I'm pleased to serve as a tour guide of sorts to walk us through this with our experts. As Ashley, my wife and office manager, can attest, THCA is something that we talk about together with clients, with friends, you name it, probably every day for hours. And so it's nice to be up here on a panel talking about it with some experts. So let's kick this off real fast, just so you know the quality of people you have up here. I'd like everyone just to give us a 20, 30-second blurb about who you are and what it is that you do specifically in relation to THCA.
My name is Andrew Schreiner.
You want to grab a microphone?
Check. Andrew Schreiner here. I represent a few Earthy companies here. I'm representing Earthy Now and Earthy Select and Earthy THCA. I've been in the hemp space for about 6 years. I came from the legacy before that, and I'm happy to be here.
Craig Small, I'm an attorney with Clark Hill. I've been practicing cannabis law here in Colorado since 2009, and before that in California. primarily doing marijuana law, but as Rod was saying, the lines are getting blurred. So a lot of my clients are hemp-derived cannabinoid clients, and you see the marijuana business going over to the hemp side, you see the hemp side looking at the marijuana side, but certainly it's all the same issues, all converging to the same points.
So my name is David Sergi. I'm an attorney in San Marcos, Texas, which is near Austin. I've been involved in the space since about 2010. I also do some criminal work, and I've been involved in several cases, including THCA cases. I've worked with Rod on cases in Florida, as well as with Philip, and we're also involved in several Texas litigation matters in Texas, including Delta 8 litigation.
My name's Philip Snow, and I got my start in Colorado 2011 as a marijuana attorney. Moved to the Southeast in 2019 and started working with Rod, and pivoted toward the hemp and cannabinoid space, and have been practicing in that space ever since, and looking forward to a very exciting topic today.
It is certainly the topic of conversation. So let's kick it off, Ander, with you. Can you tell us, when we talk about THCA, what are we referring to? What are the products that are out there? When someone says, THCA, the cannabinoid, fill us in on what is meant typically.
Sure. Most products in the cannabis industry, whether that be marijuana or hemp, there is THCA in the vast majority of them. When it comes to flower, when I first touched the first hemp flower in 2014 or 15, it had THCA in it. In 2018, when everybody figured out what hemp flower was, people started saying, well, do you have any that's high in THCA? Well, sure. Because, Crawford Genetics had, a little bit. Sometimes it went a little hot. Sometimes it was warm in THCA. So in 2018, you could find some lifter that might have 4% THCA, while marijuana is, high THCA, 15 to 30%. If you go to the dispensary, like Rod was saying, the marijuana dispensary, it actually says CBD or THCA. It doesn't say THC. So, but our Earthy Select company offers pre-rolls, flour, live rosin, bubble hash. We have a product line that we've added water-soluble liquid CBGA, CBDA, and THCA to, in addition to Delta 9. But there's a plethora of products, diamonds, batter butter, all those silly things, concentrates. The sky's the limit. If you find it in the MJ world, it's in the hemp world. And the marijuana companies know it, and they're doing it too. So it's, it's all cannabis.
Great. Well, given that it's everywhere, Philip, I'm going to toss this over to you. Is THCA, at least flower or the products that we see, is it legal, at least at the federal level? And if so, can you give us a little more description of why, and maybe what some of the controversy and misunderstandings are about?
Absolutely. So I think, we talk about cannabis, an overarching botanical term, and this is a very unique plant in the sense that it is, to my knowledge, it is the only plant within the entire world that is regulated solely by a tertiary metabolite that is expressed in the last 30 days of cultivation only in the female form. And by that I mean Delta 9 THC. The sole distinguishing metric between lawful hemp and unlawful marijuana is the content of Delta 9 THC by dry weight. Courtesy of the 2018 Farm Bill, which removed hemp from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, which removed its derivatives, extracts, isomers, and cannabinoids, from the same, provided it didn't exceed that 0.3% Delta 9 THC threshold. We have a very interesting product, and that's THCA. And this is something that comes about, again, within that last 30 days of cultivation, and depending on specific state law, let's say. Which I'm not going to get into for purposes of this immediate answer, the sole distinguishing metric, as I mentioned, is that Delta 9 content. So if you harvest a plant typically 30 days post-harvest, or excuse me, pre-harvest, you are looking at the total THC content in that plant. That total THC content allows for the decarboxylation of THCa into delta-9 THC. So that formula is commonly referred to as delta-9 plus THCa times 0.877, which equals this total THC content. If the plant passes that metric 30 days pre-harvest according to the USDA, then you can harvest it 30 days later. So within those guidelines, THCa is federally legal provided it doesn't exceed that delta-9 threshold post-production. Now, production within the context of the 2018 Farm Bill is a very, very important term to understand because production means cultivation. The USDA only deals with pre-production hemp. So we're only talking about the plant as it is still being cultivated. Once we get past that point, all we're worried about is delta-9 THC, therefore federally THCA hemp is legal.
What about the testing methods that are used? Greg, can you speak to that? Are there different testing methods that are out there that labs use, and what effect, if any, would that have on determining whether a product is compliant or not?
So there are a multiple variety of testing methods that are used, but the most common one is gas chromatography. And what that does is it actually heats up the sample, and as it's turned into a gaseous state, it measures those gases to determine what's actually in the plant. The problem is THCA, when it goes through that process, decarboxylizes that THC into D9, so a product wouldn't have that much D9 before the test is going to give it that D9. And a terrible analogy that I'm always looking to see if anyone can give me a better one is, with the radar guns that cops use, it'd be like saying that the radar gun is not just measuring your speed, but it's adding some blur factor that the more blurry you are, that's going to add another 10 miles an hour to your speed. And then they're going to say, well, the speed limit is 65. You may be going 60. I'm sorry, if it's speed limit is 65, you may be going 50. But that machine is artificially giving you a boost to get you over that. And the problem is the gas chromatography test, which has been used in a variety of different places for a variety of different ways, all having to do with the plant cannabis. It starts at the beginning and it ends with law enforcement, and there's really this middle ground that doesn't really talk about what the testing standards should be. So the question is, should it be gas chromatography? An alternative that I know of is liquid chromatography, where I'm not a chemist, I don't understand exactly how it works, but my understanding is maybe it just spins it up and it spreads it out. So you can actually measure these things as their individual components as opposed to trying to combust them.
Sure, of course.
I was in Oregon in 2019 with a couple elders. They're in their upper 70s. We just got some hemp samples, had them in the back in the car, not wrapped really well, but we were taking them to the testing lab. We got pulled over. They said we didn't stop long enough at the stop sign. It's fine. What's that smell? I'm not sure. It smells like marijuana. Oh, there's no marijuana in here. Get out of the car, no problem. Old guys got out of the car, I got out of the car. They put cuffs on me for a second. They were nice. The other cops came, they got their little testing shaking kit. They put the hemp in there. It was lifter. It was less than 0.3. Shook it up, turned red. Oh, nope, that's marijuana. I could have told you it was going to show that. So that's what you're saying. There is no test kit. So you could test THCA hemp flower, you could test marijuana, or you could test CBD flower. It's still going to shake red. So it doesn't really matter. It's all the same. It's all cannabis.
Well, that's something we're seeing. I mean, right, David? Are you seeing? You're dealing with criminal cases out of Texas right now. What is law enforcement doing? First of all, in terms of exactly what Andrew just talked about. Pulling people over, using the field test. Is that sufficient probable cause? How is that playing into the case? And then what happens? Down the road, maybe when we're dealing with, okay, they've sent it off to a lab, And has the lab used a gas chromatography method or not? So can you give us a little insight as to what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I represent retail shops, and we literally had the conversation today with the chief of police of a smaller city, and we were arguing with her and saying, look, you can't use this field test that will distinguish between THC of some variety and CBD because it doesn't tell you anything that is illegal. And she was very apologetic. She said, well, that's what we have, and your client may beat the rap, but not going to beat the ride. And that's the problem we have. So we are seriously contemplating filing a lawsuit to stop what they are doing and bringing in the testing lab, because we looked at the lab that produced the field test, and they are overstating its capability, and then in a footnote admitting we can't determine the difference of what type of cannabinoid it is, whether it's a legal cannabinoid or not. And so, to me, suing that manufacturer and saying, you have basically misidentified what you can test for, is a backdoor way of attacking what law enforcement is doing, because these guys are not chemists. These guys are cops. They're doing what they're trained to do. And unfortunately, the message hasn't gone through. Now, in other circumstances, for example, in Grand Prairie, Texas, we met with law enforcement. We said, we represent all of these shops that want to do business the right way. We would like to have an agreement on how to do business. And we referred back to some Texas law. And amazingly, about a month later, they sent us a draft of a letter, which we fully agreed with, which allowed stores to sell product. Here's how we test, by the way. If something comes up hot, please let us know so we can let the rest of the stores know and also comply with Texas law and let the Department of Health know. And we've been working with law enforcement to educate. Matter of fact, next week on Wednesday, I'm going to be presenting to a grand jury in a case where the DA fully expects not to be indicted, so he can use that to go back to his law enforcement community and say, look, they didn't indict. Now, how are we all going to work together? Because the field tests you're using are inappropriate. You're wasting a lot of taxpayer money, and you're putting a lot of people in jail that don't need to be in jail to begin with. So, hopefully that answered the question.
I think it did. Well, are you seeing that though? I mean, just as a quick follow-up, and are you seeing, stops happening? Are you seeing smoke shops or hemp shops or shops of any type being raided? In what capacity are these things, at least in Texas, how are they, coming to your attention as a lawyer defending people who are accused of crimes?
I mean, mostly we'll get a client calling us in a panic that'll say, law enforcement is in our store. We just filed a lawsuit against the booming metropolis of Post, Texas, because the sheriff walked in the store and said, they ain't selling this stuff here. It's illegal. Well, my guys argued for a little bit. They took it. Can't even find it now, apparently. And we want our product back. They took about $20,000 worth of product. And we talked to the city attorney, and they said, well, you're dealing with the county over there, and they're above it. So, we're seeing a lot of smaller municipalities, smaller counties. In Texas, we have 254 counties, maybe 20 of them are large. And the larger counties are educated, they're working with us. The medium-sized counties, they're willing to listen to us. The small counties, we got to hit them over the head. And so we are.
So we're talking about state and specifically Texas right now because we've got a Lone Star attorney up here with us. But when we drill down into state law, I'm going to pitch this over to you, Philip. What about THCA at the state level? I mean, what are we seeing? Is THCA legal in all 50 states? Is it not? How are legislatures, how are regulators addressing it?
It's a great question. And I think, I don't like to use trite phrases, but I think that's a multifactorial problem because, you have states that are banning smokable products outright. We've seen that in places like Indiana. That was, challenged in court in Indiana. We've seen states across the country that are banning smokable products in varying forms, right? So A useful example of this would be a state like South Carolina. On the laws, the laws in the books in the South Carolina Code of Laws specifically state you cannot be in possession of raw or unprocessed hemp without a license issued by the state. Well, in a conversation that I had with the chief law enforcement officer of that state, I said, so let me just get this straight, because your definition of processing is converting an agricultural commodity into a marketable form. So if I grow it, I harvest it, I dry it, I cure it, I trim it, I grind it, put it into a pre-roll, I package that pre-roll, I label it, and then I transfer it to a retailer. At what point during those 10 steps have I converted that agricultural commodity into a marketable form? And he said, I've never given you pre-rolls. I said, okay. So something of an antiquated prohibitionist mentality. So it's not just banning smokable products outright. It's the devil is in the details, right? Because you might be dealing with something where you can't be in possession of raw flower. You might be in a state where they use a total THC calculation to determine the lawful status of a finished good. By that I mean, it's going to account for all forms of THC. It can't exceed 0.3%. Useful example of that would be a state like Georgia. I forget the number of the bill that just passed, I think it was last week, within the state of Georgia, that defines total Delta 9, which is 0.3%, but that total Delta 9 includes THCa. So while Georgia was a win for the hemp-derived products industry, it actually was a loss for the THCa industry. Other states across the country, North Carolina, for example, is a different state where THCa hemp in the flower form is unequivocally lawful. So you have to look at these very, very specific state regulations, because by and large they don't just come out and state it outright. A lot of places will, again, take the smokable ban form. They will use a total THC metric. Other states will, typically, and this is in states with more robust medical or adult use marijuana markets, they will do everything they can to just ban smokable hemp flower. So I think that it's useful to work with a good attorney. Not that I'm naming any names, but certainly the ones on this panel that would be able to kind of help you navigate those waters, because as more and more states come online with medical or adult use marijuana, we're going to continue to see hemp subjected to various restrictions as it relates to the market share that hemp is potentially taking away from marijuana. So I think it's certainly something to pay attention to, certainly to consider, as it relates to your ability to distribute THCa flower across the country. Unfortunately, we don't have easy jobs, much like everybody in the audience. So that's why it's critically important to stay on top of these regulations.
Well, given that, state A, we can sort of look at the law, and to your point, they're not going to say, oh, THCA is legal, and but we do an analysis. In state A, THCA flower, for instance, might be unequivocally legal. In state B over here, it's unequivocally illegal, but we're trying to get it to state C, and we've got it moving across interstate commerce, which the Farm Bill, the USDA says, well, this is interstate commerce is fine. In fact, the state can't prohibit that. What are we seeing on the ground? And then I'm going to follow up and talk about what are some best practices. If a driver is driving through this state B where it's unequivocally illegal and says, oh no, but this is legal in the state where I'm coming from, the state where I'm going, does that solve the problem? And I'm actually going to open this up to anybody who wants to talk about interstate.
So I had a client call me the other day, shipping product through New Mexico. Well, New Mexico, it's legal. Well, Bureau of Indian Affairs is the ones that pulled them over and seized the product. And we then called up lawyers we know in New Mexico, had the conversation. Well, BIA has a very different idea. And they were happy to let the the driver go, even though he had all the paperwork. But there's still a federal court issue looming in the distance. I know that we, since early days, have always told our clients to have paperwork, paperwork, paperwork. Have the bill of lading, make sure that you have all the proper licenses from all the proper entities from each state as you go through. And you gotta keep on top of it because those regulations are changing almost monthly. And early on, we had some medical marijuana that was being moved from California to another state, and driver got pulled over, spent 3 nights in jail. And it wasn't until we were able to get all the paperwork, which he should have had with him at the time, including all the COAs to show that it was legal in the state and was able to be moved appropriately. Took us 3 days to get him out of jail and no charges were filed, but make sure you document, and more importantly, that you have your permits. Make sure that you are on top of each permit in each state along the way.
If I may, I think it's also critical to note that, as the hemp industry and, the landscape of hemp regulations across the country continues to evolve, you're seeing more and more states require shipping manifests. So, in various parts across the country, you do truly have to potentially change the documentation that you have in a given state. Certainly we all enjoy the blessings under the 18 Farm Bill where, states cannot prevent the interstate commerce, and the shipment of hemp within their borders. But at the same time, and to David's well-made point, make sure you know what you're getting from the cultivator. Make sure that what was cultivated was lawful in its jurisdiction of origin. If you're able to get your hands on it, certainly try to get a copy of their cultivation permit, the COA at the relevant point in time that it was necessary in its jurisdiction of origin, and then also be able to demonstrate its lawful status the entire way. Because this is something that, quite frankly, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, law enforcement is going to have significant issues with it. We see the same thing that's happening in retail locations across the country. Well, by and large, and this is certainly no offense to law enforcement officials within the room, cops hate jars. They hate seeing it on shelves. To them, it all is the same thing. So, the more favors you can do yourself across that entire supply chain, the better off it's going to serve you, ultimately your people that are transporting this across the country, and then whether it's a distributor or a retailer at the end of it, that is going to hopefully ensure something of a smooth transportation process. But this is just the lawyer speaking. I think Andrew would probably be more well suited to answer this than some of the legal eagles on the panel here.
Yeah, fill us in. What do you on a practical level?
Make sure you start by getting advice from your lawyer, from nobody else, right? I'm not going to do anything unless Rob tells me to do it, or blesses me. But the product's everywhere. You said where's the product? It's everywhere. It's most prominent, meaning where is THCa hemp flower or hemp THCa hemp derivatives found? Primarily in non-marijuana, recreational, and adult use states. Now, it's kind of funny, where is it all coming from? Marijuana, adult use, and medical states is where it comes from. California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Oklahoma, blah, 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 blah. The rest of them. There was a truck cruising across the country from California, went through a state that's actually a THCA hemp compliant state, had 1,050 pounds in it, had a third party logistics company that was hired. They knew what they were moving. The driver doesn't speak English. None of them do. So the cop pulled him over, told him he, I don't know, did something that he didn't do anyways, but that's fine. They arrested him. They took the product. We call this guy, oh, where did you test the product? Well, thankfully we tested at a DEA compliant testing lab that was from the same state that the cops took it from. Well, that's convenient. ISO certified, all that other stuff. Came from a hemp farm, was sold to a person that had a hemp permit. That was me. They still have the product. We got the guy out of jail, the driver, 6 days later, something like that. Told him, well, you better put it in a freezer to the police. Did they respond? No. They still have the product. You know, it's not the last or the first, you know, it's gonna keep happening. But yeah, the products are everywhere.
Craig, have y'all seen in your firm, whether it be THCA or just hemp flower or hemp products, have you seen seizures happen that you all have dealt with in terms of litigation trying to get product released?
I haven't done that personally myself, but prior versions of the work I've been doing with other firms have. And it's the same story. It's you know, no matter how many times you tell law enforcement they have a duty to preserve evidence, they just ignore it. So a lot of the product gets seized, a lot of product disappears, a lot of the product just turns moldy, a lot of product, you know, it just becomes unusable at a certain period of time. And I have to imagine that's part of law enforcement's strategy. You know, that's an easy win for them to get that 1,050 pounds off the market.
And it's decarbing as the cops hold on it and keep it in their 90 to 100 degree Fahrenheit warehouse as it gets warmer.
That's one of the first things we do is we send a letter to law enforcement with an article about decarbon saying, you are tampering with evidence if you do not keep it in a dark, cool space. Matter of fact, we're actually telling some of our retailers, if you're purchasing it from out of state, ship it on dry ice as if you're ordering some food on dry ice, and then keep it in a freezer and have a sample out there to show people so it doesn't decarb. But you're exactly right.
Does anybody in the crowd know who holds the patent? I think there's 5 of them for the process to produce THCA diamonds.
Looks like no.
It's a pharmaceutical company. Do you know who owns the prisons? Corporate entities, private. Do you know the wealthiest cannabis company in the world? Any idea who that might be? Y'all don't know nothing about weed, do you? That's okay. It's another corporate entity. Do you know who owns the majority shares of the largest cannabis company in the world? Come on, Franny. Corporate entities, like Chase, Morgan, Stanley, those type of people.
BlackRock.
They, you know, who do you think owns the prisons? Huh, same families. It's interesting.
Well, how do we avoid that? So, you know, in terms of legal standpoint, how do we avoid these risks? How you know, this is all general. We're not providing specific legal advice. But what would you tell clients? We've got 3 lawyers down here who want to say, hey, I want to get into this THCA thing. What do I need to do and what should I not do? What are some general premises?
You absolutely have to talk to an attorney because every state is very, very different. Every state is evolving. And there's more to it than just the laws and regulations that are written in books. You actually have to see how those laws were argued and implemented in the first place, how they've evolved over time, and talking with regulators to better understand the behind the scenes of policy. Because policy can be every bit as important as what's written in the book. And as long as you understand what the regulators are trying to get at, and you have a better understanding of the parameters of where you can get away with something versus where you can. And certainly with every state having different packaging or labeling requirements, there's no way to make a uniform label. So certainly it's not illegal advice to make different labels, but if your labels are substantially close in every meaningful way to what that state's label requirements are, that's a better position to be in than to have a label that just completely goes off the rails. So you have to talk to the attorneys, and the most boring part of all of this is contracts. Because getting to some of the points we were talking about earlier today, it all starts with a contract with you and your manufacturers or distributors or ingredient sources. Not only to make warranties and representations of what they're giving you, how do you know that that's true? So now you need to have them give you the documentation that proves what they're telling you is true. And even that's not enough. This is one reason why I hate lawyers. We just cost everyone money. We just tell the clients, you need to even take spot checks to take their product and testing it and comparing it to their COAs to see if what's in there is true. Because as much as they could think that everyone out there is a reliable operator, the fact is there are plenty of grifters out there who will tell you everything you want to hear to buy their product at 5% less than what someone else is selling it for. But the fact is they're full of BS.
I think we're at 1 minute, so I'm gonna follow up with a policy future-looking question. I'm gonna pitch this over to Philip. We've seen some calls to raise the THC level from 0.3% to 1%. What does that mean for THCa?
I don't want to call it a $64,000 question, but it's a loaded question. But beyond that, I would say that, I was in DC for a few days earlier this week, and there's certainly buzz floating around on the Hill regarding this very question. How do we, deal with calls to increase the THC number to 1%? Well, the common thing that I would say as it relates to that question is, what is in between the number and the acronym? Is it 1% total THC? Is it 1% Delta 9 THC? Because, and not just speaking as a lawyer, but the devil is in the details, right? I mean, everybody in this room can kind of attest to that. So, again, if you're moving the goalposts in the middle of the game and you say 1% Delta 9 THC, well, I think everybody in this room would probably be doing cartwheels. If that changes to 1% total THC, not only would THCa, suffer greatly and quite frankly be decimated, but you would be taking away the bedrock definition that the last 6 years of progress has been established on. The cultivars that are going into this industry right now have been completely dialed in as a result of that definition under federal law at 0.3% Delta 9 THC by dry weight. Most people in this room can strongly attest to the fact that you're here as a result of trial and error, and probably a lot more errors, than wins. A lot of people aren't in this room. A lot of people that are, paying attention to what's going on in their state houses, paying attention to what's going on in the Hill in Washington, D.C., they're one of 100 companies that have made it through. And changing that definition, moving it to 1% total THC would, all but destroy most of the businesses that exist, certainly in the hemp-derived products industry, because, not only are we capturing Delta 9 and THCa at that point, we're capturing Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta 7, whatever the chemists come up with next that has a Delta in front of it. But you're really going to rock the foundations of what this industry is based off of. So when, I was meeting with people on the Hill this week, it was certainly a call to keep that definition intact. Leave it at 0.3% Delta 9 THC and give us what this industry sorely wants, which is stability. Give us 5 more years of being able to prop up true industrial applications of this plant, whether that be vis-a-vis THCa flower, whether that be through cannabinoids and finished goods. The true industrial applications haven't been able to realize themselves yet because the infrastructure hasn't been built up. The farmers need a place for the biomass to go. And certainly increasing that number to 1% might help farming to a certain extent, but it's not going to do anything for the end consumers. And the farmers that are making hemp for BMW's door panels or Mercedes dashboards, or the hempcrete that's paving highways in Florida, the rope, the grain, the fiber, all of that, needs the stability that, a federal reauthorization in the form of maintaining that definition would bring. So that 1% THC, in my opinion, is a very, very, not even a well-disguised wolf in sheep's clothing. It is something to very acutely pay attention to because it would completely undo everything that we've been working so hard on for the last 6 years, and even hearkening back to the 2014 Farm Bill. So that would be a seismic shift and ultimately catastrophic for the industry, in my opinion.
I knew you'd give us a thorough answer on that. Thank you. So that's great. It is. It's sort of counterintuitive. People, I think, would assume, oh, 1%, great, hemp industry must be for it. But the devil is in the details, and I think stability is the thing that we need. So we are out of time. Thank you all for listening, and we didn't have a chance for questions, but we're certainly happy to answer questions afterwards, and we appreciate